Hi everyone, welcome back to another video of Mike's Geek Corner with your host, Mike Avedo. Hope everyone is keeping safe out there. In this video, I'm going to talk about one of my favorite comic book artists, Jim Aparo. And I'm going to talk about his career and in the comic business and like the work he did and the impact he made. Then I'm going to talk about 4 books here that contain what I think is some of his best work. And so, let's get started. Jim Aparo first entered the comic field professionally when he was hired to work on the comic strip Stern Wheeler in 1963. Then in 1966, he was hired by Charlton Comics, where he would go on to draw such titles as Captain Atom and The Phantom. He made a name for himself as being one of the few artists at the time to do penciling, inking, and lettering. In the late 60s, he was offered a job at DC drawing Aquaman, while still continuing to do art for Charlton's The Phantom. Aparo eventually left Charlton Comics and remained with DC, where he then laid his talents on titles like The Phantom Stranger, House of Mystery, and House of Secrets. In 1971, he was given the work for the title The Brave and the Bold, which he lasted with until the early 80s, in which during that time he also penciled both the Brazen Tales of the Spectre and the Aquaman revival for the title Adventure Comics, and the solo Batman series Detective Comics. During the 80s and 90s, he made his mark in the Batman legacy with such titles as Batman and the Outsiders, The Untold Legend of the Batman, and such classic story arcs like The 10 Nights of the Beast, A Death in the Family, and Nightfall. He won a Shazam Award for House of Mystery number 201, as well as an Inkpot Award in 1993. After his death in July 2005, he was inducted into the Will Eisner Hall of Fame in 2019. What I love about Jim Aparo's style is the briskness in his approach to illustrate a story with a very unapologetic, lurid vibe. Think of the Hammer films, particularly those directed by Terence Fisher, such as The Curse of Frankenstein, Horror of Dracula, Curse of the Werewolf, The Hound of the Baskervilles, Bride of Dracula, etc., most of which starred Christopher Lee and Peter Cushing. These films were written straight, and Terence Fisher applied in his direction a sense of stylized realism that boldly embraced the material's gothic supernatural atmosphere and a provocative sense of dread and eroticism. That's very much how we see Aparo's sequential art. His characters are drawn in a style that combines the classic realism of an Alex Raymond or a Burnt Hogarth with a measured level of cartoonish aesthetic that gave them a versatile, frenetic energy that lent themselves effortlessly to the weirdest, raciest, and the most macabre stories, as it did to superhero adventure. And with that, here are 4 recommendations if you want to treat yourself to this master's work. So here we have The Phantom, the complete series, The Charlton Years, Volume 1, published by Hermes Press in 2012. This hardcover publication features mostly Jim Aparo's early work in the field with Charlton Comics, which collects The Phantom issues number 30 through 40 during 1969 and 1970. And he does a fabulous job illustrating the jungle adventures of the Ghost Who Walks with scripts by Dick Wood and Norm DePlum. What you have here are very much straightforward, if overly simplistic stories, but Aparo's dynamic pencils and inks bring a thrilling grace to these pages. His style is not yet as polished as it would be in the DC books, but there's already present that sharp sense of dramatic action. Phantom fans will no doubt miss lore characters like Phantom's girlfriend Diana Palmer and his friend Garam, but it is still fun to see the Ghost Who Walks in stories taking place away from his home in the jungles of Bengali, and taking on racketeers in the Himalayas in The Phantom of Shangri-La, and then confronting an Egyptian version of the Phantom in The Pharaoh Phantom. If you treasure Joe Kubert's Tarzan run, you should give Aparo's Phantom a shot. Now we get to the DC stuff, and first off we have the hardcover Legends of the Dark Knight, Jim Aparo, Volume 1, published by DC in 2012. It collects The Brave and the Bold, numbers 98 through 122. These stories are written by Bob Haney, and the stories are published between 1971 and 1975. It is in these stories where Jim Aparo establishes himself as one of the definitive artists of the Bronze Age of comics, as well as in the Batman Legacy, along with Neil Adams. Aparo's rendering of Batman has the same realistic qualities that Neil Adams first applied to Batman earlier, which brought the character back to his dark roots after the fad of the 1966 show ended. Aparo's style, with its slight Jack Davis-like cartoonish seasoning, complements Bob Haney's vividly imaginative Gonzo scripts, even if they ignore that era's DC continuity and also logic sometimes, as we see Batman team up with a different DC character in each story. Among these adventures, there's a team-up with Green Arrow in Double Your Money and Die, where Batman investigates serialized murders that consist of investment shareholders for a corporation. Oliver Queen, who is one of the shareholders, joins Batman as Green Arrow to find this killer, guided by a clue of a coin found with each of the dead shareholders that has a number 2 engraved on one side. There's also Bats and Black Canary in the $3 Million Sky, as both, posing as flight engineer and flight stewardess respectively, board a skyjack airplane to thwart the perpetrators and return the ransom money to the city of Gotham and the notorious convict Monk Devlin back to prison, in an adventure that includes a climatic battle in the South American wilderness. In Death Has the Last Laugh, a classic yarn in Batman lore, we find the Caped Crusader hunting down his most definitive nemesis, the Joker, after committing a self-incriminating murder of a family. But he comes across an event that leads him to believe that the Joker was set up by a criminal named Bert Slade, and so he decides to make an unlikely alliance with his longtime foe to capture Slade. But with the Joker, one should always expect the unexpected. And who doesn't like it when Batman teams up with the rhyming demon Etrigan? Well, in Gotham Bay, Be My Grave, we have their first encounter, as a century-old gruesome volcanic demon bent on revenge on a long-dead sea captain directs his wrath on any seafarer in sight. Next, we have the trade paperback, Wrath of the Spectre, published by DC in 2005. It collects the issues of Adventure Comics, numbers 431 through 440, during 1974 and 1975, and also Wrath of the Spectre, numbers 1 through 4, from 1988. With stories plotted by EC Comics veteran Joe Orlando and writer Michael Fleischer, Jim Aparo showcases his flexibility to effectively combine superheroics with supernatural horror. Each story feels like an EC Comics story with a heroic edge to it. Some of them have what at the time, at least, was considered very provocative content. The basic premise of the stories consists of the further exploits of Detective Jim Corrigan, a tough cop who had been murdered by mobsters, but returns from the grave by an entity known as the Boys to vanquish evil in the form of the Spectre, as he comes across our sinister schemers, like a conniving Swami, a fanatical military field marshal and his band of terrorists, and murderous mannequins controlled by a demented mannequin maker. Finally, we have the trade paperback, Aquaman, Death of a Prince, published by DC in 2011. It collects the issues of Adventure Comics, numbers 435 through 437, and 441 through 445, and Aquaman, numbers 57 through 63. This is during their years from 1976 through 78. It features mainly issues with writer Paul Levitz scripting for Jim Aparo's art, with other stories featuring the work of writer Steve Skeet and David Michelini and Paul Cooperberg, and art by Mike Grell and Don Newton. This publication features the adventures of the King of the Seven Seas, joined by Queen Mira and Aqualad, as he attempts to rescue the throne of Atlantis from the plunderer Captain Demo, to investigating a heroin trafficking operation by the use of dolphins as transportation, to regaining his throne from the usurper Karshan, to matching his elemental powers with those of the Weather Wizard, and confronting his most notorious nemesis, Black Manta, for vengeful purposes. Aparo brings so much energy to Aquaman in the way our hero displays a sharp, commanding presence, likely influenced by Marvel's Submariner comics, as well as a very dynamic showcase of underwater movements, conveying a sense of realism. And seeing how Aparo was a fan of Alex Raymond and his Flash Gordon strip, you get the sense that he is inserting a bit of the passion that he had for that property into these Aquaman pages. Aparo's Aquaman is one of my favorite versions of the character. And that's Jim Aparo. He'll always be one of the quintessential artists of some of my favorite comic book characters. And his is a style with a flair that accentuates the story's tone to 11 so gracefully. So that wraps up this appreciation segment. Hope it has struck your fancy and your taste for a good old Bronze Age comic card. So if you like this video, make sure you give it a thumbs up. Make sure you subscribe. Feel free to leave your comments down below. And I'll be seeing you soon. Be safe out there. Bye-bye.